Hi guys, welcome to the Alternative podcast. Today we've got Burch Driver. He's got his own podcast called The Green Knight. We'll leave all the details in the description. Burch, sorry. Where did you initially start this journey? What got you into the podcasting space?
I think a lot of people ask a similar question, is like, what was your moment, your aha or your wake up, And for me, it's, I said on my last interview that I basically was born that way, like born kind of feeling like a freak on the periphery on the outside, and then I had to deal with that, throughout my life, always feeling different, and also this sense that I was being excluded, so I had to master this victim mentality to overcome it, And so that, being on the periphery gives you a different kind of viewpoint. It allows you to see things as they are instead of can't see the forest because the trees, that aspect. So I've always been that kind of way. And when I was 15, I kind of had a wake up moment. But, you wake up, there's, you can't pitch your tent, right? So there's always another plateau to ascend, right? And so that's what my mission has been. As far as starting podcasting, I was listening pretty heavily over the last 5 years, and previous to that, I went to school in LA for industrial design, and back in early 2000s, there was a thing called KPFK in LA, and this is a public radio. And I used to listen to that religiously. And on KPFK, you have the left, hard left, and hard right coming on right after each other, And so I started to realize back then, 20 years ago, that this polarity is a unity in disguise, right? Is that one side defines the other, and they can't exist without each other. And so it's like if someone's opposition would suddenly disappear, then they would find themselves hard pressed to identify themselves. You know what I mean? And it's like, I'm against this. This is how I am. This is what I do. I'm against this. But when you realize that it's a polar relationship, right? And so I made that realization back listening to KPFK, and listening to the real lefties, and then immediately after one of these hard right guys like Limbaugh, and so you get to see the contrast and recognize that they're just playing off of each other, right? Two wings on the same bird. And but as far as podcasting goes, like, I just had this idea that it's possible to come out of this kind of like downward spiral that our civilization seems to be in. And I came at it from the idea of manufacturing, because I was in industrial design. And so I was like, how do we fix manufacturing? And once you go down that rabbit hole, you realize that there's symptoms. Our society has all these symptoms that stem from one problem. And this is what I've discovered. And so if you can identify the problem, then you're halfway to the solution.
Yeah. What did you do in manufacturing to sort of start? Well, that's where you sort of started to try and make change. What was it exactly that you did there?
Well, I started to develop a philosophy of what it really is, like what value is, and value comes from people living, right? And we live by exchange. We don't individually, some of us do, but we don't individually interface with the environment. We interface as a collective, And so what we do is we exchange value with each other, and that value is largely centered around manufacturing, around the objects that we make, because we are all specialists, and so we all fit into this larger structure that is creating output, right, that we all value, And so I was like, if we really want to make an adjustment to our civilization, right, we have to understand our real motivations, right? And our original motivations, our natural motivations, is what we're told is that we must survive, right? But what we're built to do is to live, So why would you must survive when you're already living? It's like a double bind. And So we exchange, right? We exchange, that's how we live, right? We exchange value with each other to live. And largely this value comes from the things that we make, like we're creative individuals, all of us together. But as a collective, right, we operate as one unit because we all need each other to survive, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so it was like, okay, manufacturing is the problem, right? And this is, the extreme waste, all the stuff, the ownership of all of the sources of value by a very few percentage of the population, right? When really we're all built to create value, And so we've been removed from our own nature, which is to be creative, and we've kind of forgotten that we are creative, and instead we just consume. And the feedback that we give the designers of our culture, right, because it's not everyone, the only way we design our culture at the moment is the masses consume, right? And that information is taken by the manufacturers and the corporations in order to improve products, right? But really it's our nature to create, right? Each of us has these individual gifts, right? We're all unicorns. We all have these gifts, right, that are made to be of value to others, right? What are our gifts if not for other people, right? And so this is where I was coming at it. But once it's like, I'm going to fix manufacturing and redistribute the sources of value, equally across the globe, all this stuff, minimize waste, right? Remove all of these things, and then what you find out is that any new organization, this is what I found out, is any new organization that we try to create will not be sustainable if we maintain our current psychological state. And so I was like, we have to make a psychological transformation in order to create a new organization, right? That will not be corrupted, that will not be stratified and pyramidized. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I can't help but think about when you're describing what you are about Apple, because the masses all go for Apple devices, Apple phones. They're the pioneers of creativity and innovation and everything, that every sort of creative word you can come up with. But everyone that goes for them devices is sort of, a lot of the people are stuck in jobs where they're not creative at all, very repetitive jobs. And even like just thinking about it a little bit deeper, the people who actually create the iPhones, the factories they get taken outsourced out to, they're not even being creative because they're probably going to have a script of this is how you assemble it. Now assemble 100 a day. See you later. That's not creative at all. That's like the complete opposite.
And it's soul killing, right? Because it puts you in this, on an assembly line, right? And this is not our nature, right, to be like this. We flow in and out, right? We don't just ride a line, perpetually doing the same thing constantly over and over, right? And so it's like we wonder why we don't feel fulfilled, right? Is this most of us are just doing this thing in order so that we must survive, right? Right. And I talking about like that aspect about this motivation, right, that we have. And what is motivation, right? I mean, it's like a cause and effect, right? It's like this recognition that you are this individual separate from everything else, and that you are going to take these actions that will create an effect, right? But what I would love to talk about with you guys today is this idea of polarity, right? Have you guys looked into this polarity aspect much? Yeah, so one of the things I had a big realization while I was doing the podcast is I was looking at the Hermetic principles, right? And so we have to look at this information without any blinders or goggles or preconceived notions about this, the Hermetic principles. And when you look at the Hermetic principles, you realize that it's the same information that Hinduism, Taoism, Buddhism, and Zen Buddhism are imparting, right? And so it's like 7 principles, right? And just going through them quickly, it's like the principle of mentalism, right? It's the first principle, which suggests that the entirety of everything is mental, right? And so the whole thing, like, so if we were going to think of where we live as a simulation, then the programmer is not separate from the program, it is the program, right? If we think about it in that way, consciousness is everything, right? And so the second principle is the principle of everything is vibration, right? Everything is vibration. And so our five senses, right? Our known senses are all receptive to perceiving some type of vibration, right? So hearing, right? Sight and touch, right? These are all sensing vibration, right? Which is frequency. And so this is suggesting also that everything is frequency, right? And that we get this from different disciplines such as quantum mechanics and various ways, is that we recognize that everything is actually just energy and information, right? In the form of waves, right? And we kind of lose sight of it because we have this illusion of solidity and separateness. But if we look at the properties of waves, we can understand polarity and polar relationships, right? So quickly, a polar relationship is what are seemingly opposites require each other to be defined, right? So an easy one is light and dark, right? We wouldn't be able to comprehend what light is without the contrasting dark, right? And so they're undefinable by themselves. As a monopole, they're undefinable. So they are polar relationship that requires both sides in order to be defined. So it's like unity in disguise, right? And so we recognize that waves have this property, right? So if everything is frequency, waves have this property of polarity, which is that in every wave, there's a peak and a trough, right? And you can't have a wave without those two things. And so the peak and the trough is what actually defines the wave. So we can understand polarity in this way. And so polar relationships have these features, which is that they require each other to be defined, right? If you remove one, the other has no meaning, right? Does this make sense? And the other thing is that they arrive mutually, right? So all polar relationships, both poles arrive at the same time, you know. Does this make sense?
Yeah, because you could look at it from the example of male and female, right?
Yes, exactly. And so
Yeah.
that's the seventh principle, which is the principle of gender, right?
Okay.
And so so vibration correspondence, which is as above, so below, we've all heard this, right? Which is that the patterns, you can think about it macro and micro, that we see the same patterns on the macro scale as a micro scale. And there's all kinds of other ways that this we can recognize this as above, so below aspect, right? But that's one way to look at it. But the principle of polarity, right? And the principle of cause and effect. These are the fourth and the fifth principle. And so we were just discussing polarity, and then we recognize that all of the principles really, independent of the first one and the principle of correspondence, are polar relationships there, right? So male and female, right? You can't define one without the other. That's a polar relationship. And so this cause and effect one is what really, this is the one that I've really gotten into recently, is to understand this aspect, right? Which is cause and effect is a linear progression of time, right? Create a cause, get an effect, right? But this is a polar relationship, right? Cause and effect are not divisible, right? You cannot have a cause without an effect, and vice versa, right? So they define each other. And so the other defining aspect of a polar relationship is that they arrive mutually, right? And so this basically says that time is an illusion, right? That cause and effect arrive at the same time. So they're really, this illusion is just an artifact of having an awareness, right, in the spectrum of the totality that is the physical part, right? Right. And so when you start to think about this, you're like, okay, then that's why they say that all time exists at once, right? All eventualities exist at the same time.
Yeah. Would you say it's similar to? I was watching something the other day, and it was measuring the pyramids in a certain metric, but then them metrics didn't exist back in the Egyptian times. So how would they have been able to do? But would you put time in that same category as it's just another metric that we've just labeled something which doesn't actually exist? The same thing, the same way we measure anything. Centimeters and millimeters
Yeah,
don't actually
yeah.
exist.
Yeah, and if you think about it like this, there really are no events, because an event is a cause and then an effect, right? That happens at a time and a place, right? But if a cause and effect arrive mutually, then there can be no events. So we think about time as these higher dimensional aspects of the totality, right? All we can't think about it in the same way if we go up a dimension, right? Like a hyperdimensional sphere, right? An extra dimensional sphere. It's impossible to consider it because we are a 3D consciousness. It's not impossible. It's just that when we try to conceptualize it, we are unable to, and we have to dance around it, you know? And that's what I would say in this discussion is, that's what I like to say, is that we are using conception to talk about the unfathomable, right? And so we recognize that it is a trap, right? Because we can't conceive, right? What I'm trying to get at is let's begin with the end in mind, is that the solution, right? Where our civilization proliferates and moves into the future, right? Is hinged upon our ability to remove our conception of things, you know, which is to see without any human evaluation of it, right? So the objective is, that's how we allow civilization to proliferate, because the alternative is a dead end, right? It's a repeating cycle that has a limit, right? And this is the cycle that we're on at the moment, right? And so we can break this cycle. And so this is what I'm trying to conceptualize, is how we break this cycle. And so beginning with the end in mind is we break it by recognizing that we don't exist, right? That we don't exist separate from the total, right? So all of our ideas about what it means to be an individual, right, are false. And so understanding this cause and effect aspect, right, that all polarity comes in at the same time, right, is we recognize that time is an illusion and that things are an illusion, right? Because a thing and no thing, this is what I was trying to get at. No thing, nothing, and thing are a polar relationship, right? How do you define thing without a space for it to be in, you know what I mean? And what is a space, right? How do you recognize emptiness without something there as not empty, you know? And so we see this as a polar relationship, so it can't be escaped. So we have to recognize that we don't exist, right, separate from the total. We are just a thing that the whole thing is doing. You know?
Yeah, just part of the process, in a sense. So when you say about materials being sort of, I don't know how to phrase what I'm going to say. This is like mind blowing, by the way.
Yeah.
But the way I'm looking at it is materials. Like I've got an iPad right here. Everyone's always thinking, I need more materials. That's how I progress through life. I need to get a bigger TV. I need to get a faster car. I need to get a upgraded phone because every year a new phone comes out, which isn't even that much of an improvement, but everyone seems to think it is. What is that, like the turn of civilization? That's the way we've sort of adapted to technology in the wrong way, so to speak, because we're looking at it through the wrong lens.
Yeah. So the things that I'm saying, and I'm like, I don't claim anything, I don't claim to know. It's like, this is how it seems to me when I think about it. And I'm referencing all of these older thinkers, you know, from the past and people from the present. So it's not me. I'm just saying what's already been said, for thousands of years. And there is a there is a purpose, right, to talk about these things, right? This is why I'm optimistic, is that I think it's possible for us to make this psychological transformation, right? That would permit us to operate on aggregate, right, as a collective, right, in a pattern that isn't repeating and doesn't have a limit, right? And so there's a particular problem that being alive brings into being, and this is what we're discussing, right? Is that there is no way to divide out the self from other, right? There is no way, because this is a polar relationship, right? And so the key is, right, is to permit the superposition of self and other, right? Is to permit this duality, this dual nature of things, right? And in so doing, you become non-dual. You become non-dual. And so I have this thing. So I'm saying the same thing, but I have this one thing that is different, I think, from everyone else, which is that we've separated ourselves out from the natural rhythm, right? And the problem that we have with that is that it creates a vicious cycle, right? And we can recognize it by looking at history. Just the people get all up in arms about what history is or whatever, but we can definitely see there's a cyclic pattern that civilization exhibits, right? Which is a climb and collapse, climb and collapse, climb and collapse. And the distance between these collapses gets shorter and shorter. And so now we are arriving at the point at which there's a limit to that behavior. And so why does it cause a vicious cycle, right? And this is, I don't know if you guys have heard of Bertrand Russell, right? He was a philosopher that lived turn of the century into the 30s, 40s, and 50s, I think. And he wrote the Principia Mathematica, in which he tried to catalog every symbolic representation we had made, whether with logic or math, since our inception, right? And what he wants to point out with this is this contradiction which comes from set theory, right? Have you guys looked into set theory at all?
No.
Nope.
So Gödel basically threw everyone on their head in the late 1900s by saying that math is incomplete, right? And he proved there are truths that are unprovable, right?
Yeah,
So,
I have heard about this, yeah.
Yeah. And so in set theory, and so you can basically come at this pretty simply, right? It's the problem of self-reference, right? Is that you will end up with contradiction, right? At a certain point, because you cannot remove yourself objectively from the totality. So you will, and this is why math is incomplete, why there are truths that will be unprovable, because we end up with this contradiction. And so I'm getting at how this vicious cycle is created.
Yeah.
Right?
That's deep. That's super, super deep.
Yeah, and so just to try to finish this thought, so this set theory, and so there's this, Bertrand Russell came up with this paradox, right, where he says, imagine the set of all things, right? The set of all things that does not include itself, right? So it's everything, right, that does not include itself. And so when you, right, if that's the initial conditions, if that's the setup of the thought experiment, right, then yourself are outside of the set of all things. But now you're qualified to become part of that set because you're outside of it, right? But you can't become a part of it because of the initial requirements of the set. Right? So it's a contradiction. And this is the problem that we have with self-reference, is that self and other are a polar relationship, right? It's unity in disguise. You cannot divide yourself out from all other things. right?
So based on maths being incomplete, will science, based on maths being incomplete, science,
Yeah,
or
it's like
science
a
will
thought
never.
experiment where we, as scientists, as investigators, are trying to find out what the world is. But every time we get real close, we realize that the world is us, right? That we can't have, there is no objective truth from an observer's point, because you affect, you are connected to the whole thing, you know?
So traditional physics and traditional science will never find the answer.
Well, they keep looking, right? And this is the repeating of the pattern. It's the vicious cycle. And they force it on us, and they take these big concepts and they repackage them in a way that makes us confused about what they really mean. Like this non-locality Nobel Prize, right? This is what quantum mechanics says, that everything is entangled. And so what's happening locally is affected by everything in the fucking universe, right? There's no local reality, right? And so they package it in this way, and then suddenly it's like, everyone's like, are we living in a simulation? You know? And so it's not the way to think about it, right? It's just that everything, right? If we think about the universe, and all of these dudes were doing thought experiments, all of these quantum physicists and stuff, right? So think about the universe. Right? Time is an illusion, but in this spectrum of the totality where we are, right, it appears as if time passes. And so you can go back to the origin point of all things, right? You can just think about it. And that origin point is a singularity, right? Going down, 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 down to the smallest scale, right? And so if you wanted to arrive at the center, right, go inside, go all the way in, and that's the center of everything, you know? And this is what we are, right? This is what we are. We are connected to the whole thing. And when we let go, when we stop insisting on a divided self, right, then we recognize that we don't exist, only the whole thing exists. And by doing this, we actually unlimit ourselves, right? Because an individual is limited, right? Become unlimited by becoming selfless. And when I say selfless, I don't mean like always working in service of others. I mean, actually no self, right? And so when you're in this mode, this is a meditative state. This is flow state. When you're in your highest potential, operating potential, and you fucking get a glimpse of yourself, you realize that you're not even there. And then once you have that, once you take that glimpse and you're like, oh, look how awesome I am, then everything collapses, right? And your potential is limited, right? And so it's this is the catch-22, is like, let go, surrender, right? Stop acting like it's you. And then suddenly your capability is immeasurable. And so if we can all make this transformation, we can create an organization that can move into the future, right? That isn't a limit, right? That isn't a dead end, right?
Yeah, and what me and Aaron have on the journey we've been on with our channel, what we've seen is more and more people recently are waking up. Like a unique amount of people are waking up over the last 2 years, maybe. Um, so, do you think there's been a shift somewhere which has caused a mass awakening?
Yeah, and I think the shift is, it can be a trap, right? And this is what I recognize. Everyone's waking up to all of the shenanigans, right? And the wool being pulled over our eyes and all this stuff. But then, okay, so then you start pointing it out, and then everyone starts arguing about all the different ways and how it is, right? So we all realize we're getting fooled, right? And then on that plateau, we divide again, right? And so the whole truther community has been divided again, right? Based on these, incendiary topics that really aren't addressing the real issue, which is, how do we prevent the dead end, right? How do we prevent the stub timeline, right? And so, just getting back to this divided consciousness, right? So divided consciousness is the artificial rhythm, right? It separates you out from the natural rhythm, right? And it creates this pattern, right? On aggregate, our whole civilization. So we are a collective species, right? We are a collective species. And so if we're gonna if the human race is going to be available for consciousness, right, to have experiences in the future, right, then it seems like we should avoid this other outcome, which is operation from a divided consciousness, right, which is us against them. And so if all of our relationship has this as the initial conditions, right, which is that somehow I must survive, right, I must win, right, at the expense of someone else, right, it creates a pattern, right, which is a divided consciousness pattern. And it's simply that, but it's an artificial rhythm, right? And so whenever you are operating in that space, right, of divided consciousness, where I am going to do this, I'm going to take this action and it's going to cause this effect, right, then you are operating from divided consciousness, right? And so that's a polar position. That is a perturbation of the collective psyche, right? In which if you're going to operate on one pole, it immediately creates the opposite pole, right? Polarity, right? Saying you are an individual separate from everything else creates a polarization, right? That must be balanced out, right? This is how the universe works. But this divided consciousness creates a separate rhythm, right? That operates independently from the natural rhythm. And so it like divides itself out. And I would say that this is the metaphor that is in the fable of the Garden of Eden, right? Which is that we suddenly comprehend we understand the nature of good and evil, right? That's to eat from the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, right? And so this is a polarity, good and evil, right? But it's a polarity that doesn't exist except for in our own conception, right? And it is based on divided consciousness, which is that there is a threat out there, right? There is something evil, right, that I must protect myself from, right? And so we all operate in this way, right? And it creates a chain reaction. It's like at a gunfight, right? A meeting between lords of gangs, right? They all come packing, right? And whoever draws down first creates a chain reaction where everyone else fucking is going to draw down too. And then you end up with the last man standing. And so this is basically what we have. This is the chain reaction that occurs when we operate into divided consciousness. And so this is the different thing that I'm saying, that this is actually where we are now as a civilization, as a species, requires constant prodding and reinforcement, right? Because we would have naturally gone back to a state of homeostasis with the environment and just be chilling, you know, we'd just be rolling right now. But we have to be constantly maintained in the state of fear, right? In the state of threat in order to continue on this divided path, which has a limit, right? But the thing is that the more we are divided, right, as we move forward from industrialization, we become more and more fractured, more and more atomized. And like just the last 3 years, the hardest atomization that we've had yet, where just people walking past you are a threat to you, you know? And so there's a curious fucking symptom of this behavior and it is our technology, right? And the irony is, what is the message of our technology, right? This comes from McLuhan, the medium is the message. And this is what I talk about in my podcast, right? Is understanding what the medium, our technology is the mediums, right? What is the message of the medium? And what McLuhan says is the message is the medium. The medium is the message. And so all of our technology, despite us being divided, right? Only tells us that we are more and more interdependent. The more radical innovation that we take, the more interdependent we are. And so the more divided we are, the more interdependent we become. And it becomes this massive contradiction that you have to have cognitive dissonance to be able to operate under, right? Do you see this in our surroundings right now? Crazy contradictions everywhere, right? People on the left having to hold two opposite things in their mind at the same time, and yet still not seeing that they contradict each other, you know. On the right too, I would say both sides are just as full, right?
I think free speech is a prime example, because the right will claim free speech when it's something they want to express, But if it goes against what they want, then they will say, "Oh, we need regulations in place to prevent that." And then the left will be the exact same to the right. So they
Yeah,
both contradict each other.
exactly. And you'll see the big flip-flop from the last 20 years. 2004, the right wanted to censor the left for criticizing the government about war in the Middle East, right? Now we have the left wanting to censor the right, right? And no one remembers, right? You just flip sides. It's fucking crazy. But so just to finish what I was saying, which is that it's this, if we hold in our minds this division, right, this divided consciousness mindset, then in all of our relationships, it creates a pattern, right? On aggregate, over time, millions of interactions, it creates a pattern if everyone's operating from this position, right? Which is that you're separate and you must survive, you know? So, right, if we can flip that switch, right, which is to recognize that we are not separate and that you cannot be separate. And if you insist on being separate, then you get this mental illness, right? Which is this repeat the pattern. So if we can recognize that, right, then at this point, we can take all of our accumulated knowledge, right, all of our technology and operate it in rhythm with nature, right, and not operating in this artificial rhythm, right, that we are operating separate from. And the only way that is possible to do is that we all have our individual minds, right? And whatever we believe, you know, in the majority inside society becomes operatively true, right? I mean, this is the most mundane way to describe we create our own reality. You know what I mean? Which is that whatever we believe, despite its veracity or not, it becomes true in the operation of society if everyone believes that, you know? And so this is the initial conditions of the equation of humanity, right? And so if we can change our initial conditions, right, to not be in survival mode, right, to be fearless, right, and to recognize that we are here to exchange with each other, then we maximize that. We maximize that exchange. We maximize that living aspect. And so when we're divided like this, right, we don't change, right? We're fully evolved already. We had this exchange in place before the cataclysm that destroyed this earlier civilization. Are you guys down with that? Are you down with that?
Somewhat.
Yeah, there's tons of evidence, right, that there was, you know, that we had this figured out more somehow in the past. Like,
yeah, I agree with that.
so we're already fully capable, right? This living in our industrialized society doesn't improve us, right? It improves our technology, right? So we stay the same, our technology becomes advanced, but we get to a point, and this is why there's a limit to this behavior, where our technology is incompatible with our mode, with our adversarial mode of operation, right? And so our technology is saying we're interdependent, right? We put our nervous system outside of our bodies and connected all of us, right, with the internet. And everything that we make is an extension of a faculty of our bodies. And the internet is the system, right?
Do you think the ancients used to live by this way, this natural rhythm, live their lives with this natural rhythm in mind? And after this great cataclysm, it got forgotten about, or
Yeah, there was maybe 2,000 of us left, you know, after that.
so I watch quite a bit of Graham Hancock, and he's so he went to a few, like I think he went to Mexico.
Yeah, I've been studying him since his earlier books. Like,
Yeah, so you'll probably know a lot more about him than me.
Well, I agree with him, except that I don't agree in some cases, right?
Because he said there's a common story with a lot of societies where a guy came on a boat and taught them how to farm and taught them sort of how to run a civilization. Did they not pass down the knowledge from the ancients about natural rhythms?
So yeah, and this is what Matt LaCroix talks about, you know. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
A little bit. I've listened to one or two of his things.
Yeah, and so he's all into this. He's learned how to translate the cuneiform tablets and all that stuff. The cataclysm happened, right? And there was an attempt by the survivors of the high priests of this high civilization. You can call it Atlantis or whatever, right? to an attempt to bring humanity back up to a level, right? So it's almost like you could call it the fall of man, right? To remember, right? To remember man, or put man back together, right? All of these buildings and shit were like made in order to do that. But all were corrupted at some point in the past, right? And this is like, anyone listening, like, I'm not saying anything for sure, this is just what it seems like. But if you look at the history of the Mayans, right, they have this hummingbird god that comes in, right, and changes everything, right? This guy that comes from the south, and that's when they start doing all this fucked up shit, right? And so previous to that, all of these buildings are way older than we give them credit for, right? And you can see that they're more advanced on the bottom, right? And they turn into basically stacked rocks on the top, right? So there's like a degradation, right, over time of, yeah, so that we had this knowledge, we forgot it, and a little bit is survived here and there, right? And for me, it's like one of the things that survives is like Taoism, right, which is the I Ching, right? This is like teaching you the knowledge that the previous civilization had, right? But as you know, it's, I would say that it's been 8,000 years plus, right? And Lao Tzu, whatever, 6,000 years ago, right? It's been saying this shit, but it hasn't had an impact, right? We're still operating in this same mode. So the time is now, right? The urgency is here. But when you look at it from the standpoint of all timelines exist simultaneously, right? What's special about this one? Like, why is this special? Why is consciousness interested in this? Why does it appear to be like there's these other races, you know, taking a look at what's happening here? You know, that's the way it appears. I'm not going to say anything yay or nay about that. But it seems like there is forces at play that want to drive us all the way down into that stub timeline and then build a simulated universe and just live at the end of that stub, right? Inside a digital universe, you know, because they know that divided consciousness is a dead end every time. They know it's a dead end. The only way to fucking become a god is to ride down that dead end, build a giant fucking simulation, and then become a god at the end of this dead end timeline, you know? And this is where it gets real conspiracy for what I'm talking about, because this is like what the Gnostics talk about, right? With the demiurge and stuff. And for me, the demiurge isn't the creator, it's simulated creation and put it on top and install it in our minds. And so the metaverse is already here, right? But it requires constant maintenance. And so the idea is to get it into an automated state.
Yeah. Fucking hell.
Wow.
So yeah, so if you can do this, right? So how do you do this? How do you go non-dual, right? And so you recognize that there's no separation of the individual from the total, right? So that you don't exist, right? And so then you operate not from a polar position that says that I am me, right? You recognize that the whole thing is me, right? And everyone is me, right? And so it doesn't become so serious, right, at that point, in a way, you know what I mean? And so how do you make this psychological transformation? It's like, what do you guys think? Like, do you think this is possible? Like, that it's possible?
The question I've got is, the people who are in control, do you think they know about this ancient knowledge about how we should be living? And do you think they're knocking us off? They're obviously knocking us off track on purpose.
Yeah.
For their own.
Yeah. Zarya Was is an agent, right? Zarya Was is an agent, right? That basically is constantly lying to us about the history of Egypt, you know.
Sorry, who was that?
Zarya Hawass, he's the head Egyptologist, you know, national Egyptologist. And you see him on all the TV shows. He's got a very distinctive look.
Yeah, so I was saying, just going back to Graham Hancock, he seems to be onto something. And the powers that be are trying to put a stop to him getting his message out there?
Well, they put him on Netflix, so what is that? That's
Yeah,
a massive endorsement, right? That just creates more division, and I'd say that dividing people is the keeping us divided in every way possible, which is why they allow us to talk about conspiracies, right? Because it's a hard division between the normies and the people who can, see some shit. So yeah, it's like it creates this division. It gets all of these mainstream archaeologists all riled, and it's
Is there a way for, like, just as just an idea, is there a way for perhaps does it have to be the whole human race, or can it be a subculture or sub-society away from the rest of the human race that get together and start living within the natural rhythm?
That's tricky because you see these breakaway civilizations. That's kind of what you're describing. It's like, oh, we're going to go and create this community out in the woods, and we're going to be separate from everything else. But again, right, if it's successful, right, it becomes competitive against the mainstream model, right? So again, it's more division. Any breakaway civilization must be prepared to add everyone because it's all of us. It's all of us.
You asked what we think about, like, if it's possible for everyone to sort of break off. I honestly, and I would like to hear your opinion on it, because I find it really hard to believe that it's possible. Because, for example, my awakening, I was looking into conspiracies throughout my teens, got older and sort of went off conspiracies a little bit and fell into the trap of life, I guess, where it's get a job, you need money, you need financial freedom, and you need a house, and then you need kids. It's sort of like the loop that you're talking about. Most people fall into it. But because I looked into them conspiracies, and I always had that curiosity and that questioning of life itself and what is life and the deeper meaning of life, after a few conversations from doing the Alt-ernative channel, it was quite fast for me to progress from who I was to being sort of fully awakened. But then when I look at someone else who's not gone through any of the stuff that I conversations or watched any videos on what I've watched or been exposed to any of the information I have, they're in, say, corporate jobs where they're a slave to the system and they're making good money. They're making really good money, and what they think they've got fulfillment out of, where they think fulfillment is, that's what they're sort of living. I find it really hard for that person to even give the time of day to a conversation like we're having today, let alone become fully awakened. They wouldn't even want to. It would be, in their mind, it would be a waste of time to even sit down and have this conversation, which we're having.
Yeah, and so we live in a material reductionist viewpoint. Like that's the primary viewpoint, right, of our, of the world, right? Is that we are our bodies and that we die and we're gone forever, right? And that this existence is about, just having, you're supposed to, like, this is what we're told, like, just have the best life possible, right? But yeah, and that's fine. There's nothing fucking wrong with that, and you can't do shit for them. If they it's crazy how hearing something can somehow plant the seed, right? And then it grows and there's no going back, right? Once you can see, you can't unsee it, And so it's just like that character in the Matrix who he's like, I want, security, and I want a fucking badass steak, right? It's like, I don't want to live fucking in the wasteland, And it's like, if I hear what you're saying and somewhere on the inside I know you're right, but then I will be outcast, and so I won't be able to, exchange for my living. So the idea behind what I'm talking about is to reestablish this sacred exchange that exists, because this is what we do. This is our nature, right? First is to create value, right? This is what all of our faculties are made for. And the lie is that our nature is to make sure we survive. But that's a double bind, right? That's a double bind. And so that's why it creates this, like, this what I've been referring to, which is this repeating cycle, this Groundhog Day. And so it's like, that's it. It's like they make sure that the threat of not surviving is always on the horizon, you know, and that in society, even now, when largely we're not in danger, right? Our lives, largely for the most part, we're not in danger, but we walk around like our status is our life, when the only thing in danger is our status, right? Not our life, right? And so we're fighting everyone for status, right? And this is what creates the repeated pattern, because it stratifies immediately the structure of society, and the top echelon will try to maintain their control over it for as long as possible. And so they set up all these institutions in order to maintain the status quo, right? It sounds bitter when you start saying it like this, but this is how it works. As soon, if it's an adversarial mode of operation, it stratifies society instantly, right? That's what happens. And it doesn't select, right? This idea about social Darwinism, right? It doesn't select for better, right? It only selects for psychopath, right? Which is that have no fucking empathy, right? And no remorse about being ruthless, you know? And so we are already fully evolved, right? We don't need to, there's no natural selection need occur, right? We are already fully capable of doing this because we did it before, you know? We've done it before. And so it's like, it's when you go to meditate, like meditation is important in order to get this feeling, right? This dissolving of the sense of self, right? That's what meditation is. But when you set out to say that you're going to meditate because it's important, right? Then that is a will-driven activity. And so you've divided yourself up, right? So when you're operating in society, like when you realize that you don't exist, right? It doesn't mean that you stop cognizing, right? It just means that you open up space in your awareness for the new to come in, right? And so when the self dissolves, you are open. One is open for inspiration from the totality, which another way of saying is divine inspiration. And so all of this stuff is awesome. Being here is awesome. Doing the things that we do is fucking awesome. This is the interesting place to be, right? Let's make it operate as it is intended to operate, right? Whereas instead of in a divided consciousness, we get this, we're on a fucking, almost like we have a parasite, right? Where we're being driven to build this machine furiously, right? And so the only way to kill the parasite, right, is that we cannot say that, look, the system's fucked up, I see a problem, I'm going to address it, right? That is just more will acting in a divided space, right? Divided conscious space, which creates a perturbation, right? Which immediately creates the opposite. And so you're just cycling the wheel of karma. I would say that the reason that we are on this wheel of karma is because we've chosen to separate ourselves out from the natural rhythm, right? And so we can get off, but it's not an individual thing, right? We get off together. And so that the human race can proliferate and move into the future, right? In a way that is natural, the way we are intended. So all of this, like, just, you know, self-help and all of that stuff, it's hard division again. Every time it's hard division. And so it's just more of the same, right? It's more divided consciousness operating in this artificial rhythm, right? Which is separate from the rhythm of nature. So how do we do that, right? How do we do that? And it's a conception, right? So me talking about this is conceptual, but the objective is to remove conception, right? Is to remove a human evaluation of the thing and be completely aware without naming anything, measuring anything, or making a model of anything and saying that's the thing. So that's the Polish philosopher who came up with general semantics. That's what he called it. Is he just says the map is not the territory. Right? This model we have built of the world is not the actual thing. It's just a model. And the word that we use to describe things out there is not the thing. So the map is not the territory. The word is not the thing, right? And so when you're out there operating, when you make a declaration, right, then you've created a polar relationship, right? But if you can observe something and say, that's how it appears, or that's how it seems, just don't say the word is, right? This is it. This is how it is, right? Because that's a hard division, right? This is how it appears, right? And we're all here to exchange value with each other. And so let's do that, right? So it's not like when you realize you become nothing, you don't stop, right? You just allow the unfolding, right? You don't limit yourself with your own will, right? You just don't measure what you do. It's have you guys heard of Wu Wei, right? The principle of Wu Wei from the Tao. And it's translated effortless effort, or right, is where it's you are doing, right? You are living, but it's effortless, right? Because you haven't measured it, right? You haven't measured from a human or a conceptual perspective what it is that you're doing, right? So whatever you're inspired to do, don't stop and think about how hard it's going to be, measure it, right? Or think about what impact it's going to have on the world, measure it, right? Because that's a measurement. And when you are trying to measure the world, you're trying to divide yourself out from it.
Right. Yeah. Like, how much money can I make from this?
Yeah, and it's like, oh, I must do this, right? To save the world. But there's nothing to be done. And that's the thing, that's the trick. That's what makes this so hard, right? Is that we're already we're already fully evolved. And so when these new agers talk about shifting timelines, there's some truth to that, right? There's some truth to that, because all timelines exist simultaneously, right? In the pure potentiality. And it's only like us, this conscious observing that collapses it into something that is, perceivable. And so we can shift our fucking timeline collectively, right? Doing it for yourself, just getting, it's like manifesting, right? Like this 8-8 Lionsgate portal, everyone's talking about manifesting, right? And it's like, yeah, you can shift over, right, to that timeline where your life is better, where you have more stuff, where you have more comfort, more stability, more freedom of mobility, right? But it's still this parallel timeline, right, that it is gonna just be a dead end. And it's this problem of self-reference, right? Is that if you insist on dividing, it is a circular, right? It's a revolution, and that's what I call a revolution. You have a revolution, then you start again, and then the circle gets tighter, right? So the Ouroboros to me is the symbol of this mode of behavior, right? Which is we're eating ourselves, right? Until we run out of tail.
Yeah. So have you thought of any ideas on how, if society as a whole can make the shift?
Yeah, first we talk about it, right? And then if it's possible for these words to spark some kind of realization, right? And so it's first realized, right? And a lot of people are realized, right? I would probably include myself in that, but not actualized, right? Because I can see all this shit, but I still, if what you say is the case, then your life should be awesome, right? But I'm right. It's that thing that Krishnamurti says, is that it's no measure of mental health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. And that's what kind of traps us here. And that's why I get upset with guys like Jordan Peterson who say, clean your room, right? He's like, stop trying to fucking save the world, get your own shit together first. Well, get my own shit together. Now I'm well adjusted. I don't need to save the world. It's all good for me. And so this is a individualized perception of the world, that it's all about me, right? But it's all about everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, first the psychological transformation, and then this. So I started fucking backwards, right? I was like, how do we solve this, right? And so then I was like, okay, let's define value. What is value, right? And original value starts from being alive, right? Which is the certain things that are necessity to continue to live, right? And we can see that in our current society, all of those things are controlled, right? So everything that we require to survive has been stockpiled and taken control over, right? And that's not the way it should be, right? We don't earn a living, we live, you know. So the idea that I have is to reestablish the sacred exchange that is already in place, that is our nature, right? That removes this extraction of our life's blood from the exchange against our will, right? And so it's just pure exchange. And so we use technology in order to create a network that permits that, right? And so if there was a what to be done, right, it is to maximize our ability to exchange and permit access for everyone. And it's not, you know, it's not UBI, it's just you create this like structure, this interface that anyone can fucking go into based on whatever their fucking passions are. And instead of going to school to become a professional, you start creating at the bottom of whatever thing you're interested in, whatever thing you want to create. And so you're already outputting and learning as you go, you know. And I visualize it as a mandala structure, right? Where the general manufacturing stuff that requires massive cooperative effort, right? And everyone paying in to do it. Everything we agree that we need this, and it's basically infrastructure, right? That is the center of the mandala, right? And so if you want to be an engineer, right, the idea is that you travel through this interface over the course of your life, learning and adapting, and maybe, you know, parallel shifting, you know, to a different you know, sector, right? But all of these things we require as a modern civilization. We require this infrastructure, right? And so the idea that I propose is that it is an exchange, right, that everyone has access to, right? And it just maximizes our nature, which is to take our gifts and whatever lights our fire and fucking go after it and just permit that to be, right? And so we have the technology now to put the means of production into every region, right? We can use these robots not to take our jobs, but just to make shit for us, right? Why is it taking our jobs? Why does it have to be like that? Like they say that on purpose, right? In order to create this division, in order to get a situation, right, a problem that they can offer the solution to later, right? Which is UBI is just trying to perpetuate the current structure, right? Which is universal basic income, right? Just fucking do that, right? But really, it's just let everyone start to contribute, and you won't need to fucking UBI that shit. So yeah, so but in order to have this kind of a organization, right, which is organization without leadership, basically, everyone has to be able to recognize that it is all of us together that is how we live, and that the days of competition, the necessity of competition is over, right? The adversarial mode of operation is done, you know. And so, yeah, so first make the psychological transformation, recognize you don't exist, right? Is that it is only the whole thing that exists, right? And that time is an illusion, right? And so that we can actually collectively get on a timeline that permits us to fucking rock and roll, you know. And that, what would be more awesome than that, you know? Be more awesome than that.
But essentially, what will happen is we'll replace competition with passion. So, what drives like innovation now is competition. Companies want to be the next, release the next big thing, want to release the next best phone. But if you've got people passionate about making a specific thing, like a phone, or inventing a new phone, or inventing anything. They'll solely that's solely just based off their passion and not off what the competing company's doing.
Yeah, and then it's possible to have ideas compete, right? Instead of people competing, you let ideas compete. And so if you have two groups, right, two functional groups, functional teams trying to create something of value, right, that is in the same sector, right, you have everyone fucking in on that shit from the beginning, right? Real time market research, right? And so basically, before you even go into production, everyone's decided who won, and that whoever didn't get their product to fucking go doesn't lose, right? They don't, right? They lose in a way, but they don't they aren't destroyed, right? And in fact, the competition actually made it so that everything could be better, right? And so they get, compensated for that. Everyone is compensated for their contribution.
What it sounds like is the best of the free market and the best of communism.
Well, we have to these words are, they are designed to trigger and to create these images in our minds. But I would challenge everyone to think about technology in this way: is that the only reason it exists is because thousands of generations lived, right? And without those thousands of generations having lived, we wouldn't have this technology. And so it's fucking ours. It's all of ours, right? And so thinking about it in this means of production, you're a Marx fan, it's like, yeah, this is how we live. We exchange with each other, right? Everything that we make, right, is of value to everyone. And so it is everyone's, And so we would have to in order to redistribute the means of production, we have to take away corporate power. And so how you do that, right, is you ignore them, right? And so we need a network, a market, an exchange that is separate, that is in the natural rhythm, that is separate from this other one. We can't do anything inside of it. We only fucking turn the wheel on that shit. We have to ignore it, right? Go to our own fucking exchange, right? And so we create it, and we offer so much value that no one can avoid it, right? And so that's one of the things I talk about is value wells, right? Is that the clear difference between before and after of a product, like a technology. I use the stone tool as an example because it's primal simplification, right? Go back in time, you have the same factors at play, but it's much more simplified. And so you see someone using a stone tool and how they were just fucking slicing the meat off of the skin with this handheld axe, right? The difference between no tool and tool is so stark that everyone around can see the value of it, right? And so it becomes a well, right? People start to orbit this value well. And in order to perpetuate it, right, this is where my argument for cooperation over competition. Cooperation is much higher, right, as an effectiveness over competition, because in order to perpetuate the knowledge of a stone tool, there has to be cooperation, there has to be sharing, right? Can't have a guy coming in saying, this is awesome, I'm going to smash you with a rock, and now I've got one stone tool, right? But I don't know how to fucking make another one. You know what I mean? So it's like cooperation is primary driver, right, for innovation. And that's what I would say is that, yes, competition has been a driver of innovation, but it's really the individual, the desire to provide value for others. Has an individual see something like a stone tool, take it, use it, but can figure out a better way to do it. And then come back from their own individual laboratory and share with others. And so now they have something of value to share with others, and they're valued by others, and they're part of the group, right? Which is improving your chances of survival way, way, way more than being stronger and more able to kill,
So to a certain degree, this is what the universal basic income, this is the way it's sort of spoken about to a degree, not to the extent or to the sort of depth that you've explained what you've explained today. But when people talk about the UBI, they have some of these factors in there. What do you think the UBI is then? Do you think that's more of a way for the elites, so to speak, to package something up that some people?
Yeah, because it has this in it, the UBI, which is the idea to remove the pressure off of people, right, of daily survival, and so that they can pursue stuff that they want. That's good, right? But that's not what will happen. Right? The more prevalent behavior will just be this is free money, right? And so that the idea of like there's no fulfillment in this kind of thing, right? There's no grinding of these love of creation gears inside with that kind of thing, you know what I mean? And so it's not a fulfilling thing, right? Yeah, you could give someone UBI and they can go and pursue whatever the fuck they want, right? But they really want to, right, be compensated for what they've given to others, right? And so you can make it in that way where there's no barring of anyone from the sacred exchange that I am talking about, right? And so if you allow anyone to go after whatever gets their fire lit, right, that's fulfilling, right? And then they can start being compensated for the activity that they're doing in that sector.
Yeah. So flicking back to when we were talking about ancient civilizations, would you say they had a similar setup there? Obviously, far more advanced in the way we're going to be thinking about it. But do you think the actual setup was similar in that situation?
Well, they definitely had some kind of, it's like I'm not sure. We're definitely terrestrial, whether or not we've been interfered with, which we definitely have, and I don't know how, but in some way we've been interfered with. And but there was technology available back then that we can't even think about. We don't even know how to think about, right? And so every time we were like, how did they build the pyramids, and we try to think about it from our own fucking standpoint, we realize that it's impossible. We can't do it. So there's something there that they had, right? Some kind of technology that was far more advanced, right, than anything we have. And it made it so that living, right, it's basically, you could think of it as like, how would it be if free energy was a thing, right? And it would release the pressure on everything almost immediately, and so a whole different structure would be created, right? And I actually think that, yeah, free energy is a thing, right? The vacuum is not empty, it's just teeming with juice, right? And we can just take it from there, no problem. But yeah, I think in some aspects, these ancient civilizations, what they were able to do with stone, right, says that they had something figured out that we can't even think of at the moment. And it's because we aren't thinking of it in the right way, right? And so you could call this spirit science, right? And so material reductionism takes out the spirit aspect, right? And if we were going to move forward in science, we have to include that in, right? And so I think it's, if we had a better understanding of what this is, right, which probably includes that it's all one thing, right, and that all of that, and that all of this energy is available, and that we actually make it really fucking easy, right? And so, yeah, I think definitely the ancient civilizations had something, and there is ruins of cities that don't have walls, right? And so that just shows, right, that there's these large scale habitation sites that were not in need of protecting themselves.
Yeah, because they weren't run in a state of fear, because how we're run today is everyone's scared, and therefore we look to our government for security.
And so there was no thought of that. So there was no need to build a wall, right? I think in our current conception, my kind of thinking, someone like would say, oh, you're naive. It's people are always going to be bastards, and I think that's true, right? If we are operating in this mode,
Yeah, exactly. I agree.
But
Yeah.
if we aren't, then it's not the case, right? There's no need for enforcement, right? In this kind of a structure.
Yeah, because if you look at the reason why people are bastards today, it's either ego led, greed. It's one of these sort of values which, if they were to sort of fix their mindset, they could alleviate a lot of these values which aren't necessarily needed. Like holding your ego at the forefront of everything you do isn't actually required. If we were to go down this route, being greedy wouldn't be required because it's all sort of shared. It's all over the place for you. But a lot of the crime and the crap that you see today is sort of led by these values, which has been put in place by the system that we live in.
Yeah, I think they started to have to build walls when they had a surplus, right, of grain, right? It wasn't the lack of grain that created a need for protection, it was a surplus, you know. So thinking about it in that way, you know, that the laws that we create, right, demand that there be something for the law to be in place for, right? And so it creates, right, what it's trying to enforce.
Yeah, it's like the war on drugs, right?
Yeah. And so in this, you know, artificial law, right, this made up law, man's law or whatever, it creates, right? It's another way to think about it is that government is paid protection, right? Just like the mob, right?
Yeah.
And so there's no reason to pay them if there's no threat. And so they're the threat. We maintain the threat. And so that makes sure that this pattern continues. Right? It completely stops when you stop defending your identity, defending your psychological sense of self.
How important, or I don't know what your experience is with it, with all of this anyway, but how important or how much could it help if the use of psychedelics was a little bit more free?
Hmm. Yeah, I'm actually working on that a lot right now. I've started a microdosing company for psilocybin, and I've been microdosing a little bit, but so I think it's really, really important because it basically allows you to let go of that need to protect, right? And so I noticed it right away, like the feeling. I just took one when I first started taking these. We're just putting them in little gel caps, right? 125 milligrams. And there's a lot of different strains and stuff, but we found this one. But I took one, and I'm a footballer, right? And I play soccer every week. And I stepped out on the pitch that day and was just like, I own this place, you know, and I didn't even give a fuck. Right. And normally it's like when you receive the ball, all this stuff's going through your mind, you know, it's like you will be of two minds and you'll mess it up, right? You'll be like pass, dribble, shoot, and you do all three things at once, mess it up, whatever. But I just walked on that pitch and I didn't care, you know. But then once I get out there and start receiving the ball, I also again don't care what's happening. And so in that way, I was able to just score at will, you know. And so you become aware of the motion of the game at a slower scale, right? When you let go of this need to perform, you know.
Yeah, because you're letting go of the potential risks of things that could go wrong.
Yeah, yeah, of
Alleviating.
looking like a fool or, you know, or whatever, you know. And so I noticed it right away with athletics, right? And so yeah, I think it's a really, really important to break off this crust, right, over our eyes, right, that don't permit us to see. And it's not necessary all the time. I'm not saying, I'm not advocating take it forever like SSRIs, you know, the way they have people on this shit. But the idea is to get to a whole perception without any external, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, how long have you been microdosing for, and is it something you do for a long period of time? And once you come off it, are the effects like permanent after that?
Yeah, and so they can become permanent. And so I've been doing it for a while. Probably I did it 2 years ago for a while, and then I stopped. But I've been doing it because we started this company. And it's difficult because it's still illegal, mostly federally everywhere. There's only a few states here that, so it's like it's hard to talk about. But I think it's really important. But yeah, so it creates new neural pathways. It allows you to operate in situations where normally would have you anxious, in a completely calm way, right? And this actually builds it up in your brain so that it's not necessary to be using it, right? And so, yeah, the idea is that you take a 1 month supply, which is 20 tablets, and you take 4 days on, 2 days off, and you journal and you try to see the differences, the contrast, and either you keep doing it or you recognize that you've made a lot of progress, right? But what Terence McKenna says, right, and he's the mushroom guru of all time, right? You guys know Terence McKenna?
Yeah, I've heard a couple of things recently.
So I like him a lot. He has, he misses some things, just like everyone. But what he would say is that the mushrooms allow you to have a conversation, right? They have a conversation with you, and they basically slap down all of your insecurities, right? And so allow you to realize that your insecurities are, your attempt to protect who you think you are, your identity or your sense of self, and that it's not necessary.
Yeah, because which is completely artificial. But for example, someone that's never taken any psychedelics, you could explain to them the situation that it is all artificial, and they could understand that. But without, in my opinion, though, without actually feeling that, it'll be a hard thing to understand and a hard thing to believe.
Yeah, and it gives you that feeling. It offers it up for you, right? And it can be, right? It's very beneficial for newbies to this kind of thing, to have guidance and to do it in a group, right? So that if it gets scary, then there's someone there to help you. Because it can be scary, right? Because all of a sudden, right, it's telling you that you don't exist. But it's very illuminating. And so, yeah, McKenna says, you take a heroic dose one time, and it's like 1,000 hours of therapy.
Heroic dose, how much is a
5
heroic?
grams.
Right,
5 grams.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I've also I don't know what your opinions are on cannabis, but I've heard a lot of people who don't smoke it recreationally. They smoke it because it sets them straight. It tells them a few things that aren't sort of aligned right in whatever it is they are feeling like they should be aligned in.
Yeah. Cannabis can be it's a little bit more gentle maybe than mushrooms, right? And it's a different kind of spirit behind it, but yeah, definitely. I think for someone who's chronic, who's been smoking it since they were 15, you can reach a threshold where you could be done with marijuana, where it's not necessary anymore, and it does, it actually it shines a light on yourself, right? And so that's why it's a good introductory for people, for this mind altering aspect. And that's again why it gets really scary, because it's like you have to be accountable, right? And I think marijuana really does make you accountable, I mean, you'll see people get in fights and then they'll do a bong rip or something, and then someone will come back later and apologize, after sitting there all stoned thinking about it, right?
Well, yeah, you see I guess this leads on to another question, but you can see the difference there between weed and alcohol, which everyone always sort of compares the two. But what are your thoughts around alcohol? Well, yeah, what are your thoughts around alcohol, as we're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason it's, you know, it's legal, right? They like it. It's the effect that it gives people, which is it's a depressive quality, right? It taxes you, makes you tired, it fucks with your organs. You know, it feels good at first, right? And it makes you feel all like, you know, socializing and, you know, having a good time. That's all great and everything. But yeah, I wouldn't I don't think it's good, right? I think it's not good. Yeah.
Yeah, I think from the conversation we've been having today and also other conversations as well, me and Aaron both quit alcohol at the start of this year. So January the 1st, we said bye bye to
Cool.
alcohol. And then we've been having these conversations with people like the one we've had today. And yeah, like you can highlight all of the negative parts of alcohol, which are quite easy just to list off just like that. But one thing I'm noticing recently is like what we've said today about finding yourself within the mix of everyone, and everyone is you. Every time someone drinks alcohol, that pushes them so far away from even coming close to being able to find sort of the true spirit of life, what we've been discussing today. And it's escapism in the sense that, oh yeah, I've worked all week, so I need to relax and go and escape. But it's escapism on a whole nother level that no one really talks about, is that it completely cuts you off from your spiritual self and from spirituality as a whole.
Yeah, because what I find is that the next day is when it comes in, right? Is that you're beating yourself up, right? And that is when you're in conflict with yourself, that's again hard division, right? That's hard divided consciousness, right? And so it creates that cycle every time you drink, you know. Yeah. So yeah, it's not a good one, and I've enjoyed it very much, you know, over my life, and I've stopped drinking it too. And what you find is that you can get into that social state that you feel on alcohol without it, you know. It's just at the beginning you don't get this hard contrast of difference, right? It's a slow build, right? And so 6 weeks of going clean, right, feels way better than a half pint of Jim Beam.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you can get that, right? It takes 6 weeks to get that feeling. You got to be clear for 6 weeks. And then all of a sudden you're like, man, I feel light. I don't need it to talk to people. In fact, I'm way more social and I can pull shit out of my brain way better, you know, having a conversation, you know.
And what you're saying actually makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes sense. Like, you know, weed, whatever. That's the big joke about weed. It's like, oh, I wrote down the best idea. And then you wake up in the morning and it's like, you know, whatever, something to name, right? But yeah, mushrooms is a good way, and I think Hancock talks about that. But I would say that psychedelics were used against us in the 60s, you know, in the hippie movement. And it was to swing that pendulum hard, right? So that it would swing back all the way to the conservative side. And, you know, my parents were hippies, right? They were on a commune. My dad was in Vietnam. He came back from Nam, did an about face, became a hippie, moved the family to northern New Mexico, and joined a commune, you know. And there was all these high ideals and stuff, but all it did was fracture, right? Families, right? Which is what happened to my family. And also all of these boomers who were hippies at one point got their shit together, right? And became the leaders of the corporate world, and fucked us even harder, right? Right, with all of these corporate behaviors, you know, with the, you know, planned obsolescence, wasting of materials, polluting the groundwater, blah 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 blah, you know, all that shit. And so it's like, yeah, thanks a lot, hippies.
So at the beginning of our conversation, you said you didn't. You became awakened around 15 years old. I think you said. And obviously, what you've just told me then about your parents and a little bit of your upbringing. What was it that made you wake up? Do you know like, what sort of thing it was?
I was smoking weed, but it wasn't that. Although that did help me a lot because you get a different perspective, right? And you realize things with marijuana, right, that make you, it seems like you can see more than other people who are like, it's the, you know, devil weed, right? Might have had something to do with it, but I just stopped trying to get approval, right, from my friend group, right? And so I stopped trying in every way, right? And I realized after I did that my relationships were much more real, you know, and that everyone wasn't my friend, you know. And so I stopped, you know, like trying to like I started wearing just like ratty clothes, and you know, it's like I'm not packaging myself at all. You know, it's like it's me, right? You get me, right? I'm not gonna try to like create a package for y'all, right, with a shitty interior, you know? And so that was one of the main things I did at that point. I was like, I just stopped trying to like fit into the friend group.
One thing you mentioned at the start of the podcast is you had to deal with victimization when you was younger. How do you, what do you think about society today where it seems that victimhood is being celebrated somewhat?
Yeah, it's hard identification. So being a victim or being an aggressor are the same thing, right? You're identified, right? Right. You're identified, you know, with this alpha mentality, like I'm better than anyone, I'm awesome, right? And this is why I'm awesome, right? As with a victim mentality, it's the same thing. This is why everyone rejects me, right? This is because it's who I am, right? And so it becomes an ego definition, just like the other side, right? Of the bully, right? The bully is the same thing. And
It's the
so, yeah,
polarization again, isn't it?
yeah. So again, it's hard division, right? It's identifying yourself, right? And so this is what we have, right, in the modern discussion, right, which makes it so you have to tiptoe around everything. You can't say shit. You can't criticize it or you're a bigot, right? When you want to say that it's like all this hard division is actually what creates more problems, you know? So yeah, the victim mentality is the same as the bully mentality. It's the same thing.
Yeah, that's a really important point actually. Um, the other thing as well, what you were saying is what about sort of the way that you woke up. If you look at what we were discussing earlier on how if we can see other people, like if we can see it happening, the Great Awakening where everyone wakes up. There was that book. I've not read it, but I can tell what it is from the title. The monk that sold his Ferrari, I think it was called. There might be enough people who could be sort of pioneers that the way stuff's going, people in the corporates who are high up are sort of getting squeezed dry in their role. They more and more people might break their seal and decide, do you know what, I've had enough. The money's irrelevant, it doesn't actually mean anything because that's something I guess people come to a realization of. They could be pioneers and role models for a lot of other people in corporate settings or in any other settings. To be fair, it doesn't really just go down to corporates, but I guess it's another thing that you mentioned as well. It's having these discussions and giving those people a voice as well. Because it's something I had a conversation with Aaron about a long time ago. Because we're doing this channel and talking to all sorts of people, I never want to shy away from talking to anyone or ever thinking that the channel's ever going to get so big that we can't talk to certain people because they don't fit our criteria. We need to be giving everyone a voice because everyone's got reasons behind what it is they're doing, and more people
Yeah.
need to. More people.
Yeah, and on that note, thank you for bringing me on the show.
This has been amazing. So I don't know. Do you want to plug your? Because you just said you've opened a business as well. Do you want to plug any links that you have, and we can put them on the description?
So I in my podcast, right? It's a kind of a book on tape, so it's a series, right? And so you listen to it from the beginning to the end. And at the near the end, I'm still putting up interviews that I do, and I'm working on, you know, like another one right now. But I on my YouTube channel, I realized that the psychological transformation is what is required, and I discovered that when you do qigong, right? You can trick yourself into getting into a meditative state, right, without intending to do so. And so I was like, oh man, this is so cool, because I actually felt the silence, I heard the silence, right? And this is when you're connected to the whole thing, right? And your sense of self disappears. And so I was like, all right, I'm just going to show people how to do Qigong, because that's a clear way to feel this, right? That's just one way to feel it. Mushrooms is one way, right? But that's like a full jump start, like with heavy power, right? But with Qigong, it's actually just bathing your body in energy slowly, right? And then you get to this, when having a relationship with your body, right? You get to this point where you can hear the silence, right? And so I do all these videos on how to do Qigong, and I call it Stand Together. It's just at Burch Driver on YouTube, but I was like, we stand together, because the foundation of Qigong is this standing, where you stand in horse stance and you straighten your spine and you hold your hands out like you're hugging a tree, and you change to the 3 positions. And that's the foundation of Qigong. Like if you only did that, that would be enough, right? And so it's like a physical meditation. You're just standing there, right? And you get up to 20 minutes and your legs are shaking and your arms are shaking, when you're first starting. But by doing this breathing, you can access this feeling where you're connected to everything, And so I started doing that on YouTube. And so at Burch Driver on YouTube. And so if you go to the bottom of the videos, there's 3 Qigong instructional videos, the video list. And then if you just go, I'm going live periodically. I've been taking a break because I've been going through some shit, but periodically I go live where I basically just stand and you stand with me, right? And then having created that space, right, in our minds, I just start talking about stuff. So I have like 99 videos on there, or I'm talking about all the things we're talking about here. And then so my podcast is greennight.green, right? And you can find it on any platform. So whatever, you use to listen, you can search for Green Night, all lowercase, all one word. And in that, I discuss how we can, if it's possible, right, to arrive at a solution. And then talking about all of these things, in order to get a different perspective on everything that we think we already know, I used to listen to Alan Watts a long time ago, and I hear everything he says. And I listened to him the other day, and I was like, oh my God, I hear it. Like, I can see it so much more now. And he's talking about this polarity, right? And which is how he's talking about Zen Buddhism, and how a Zen teacher is always fucking with his students, and it's to teach them this thing. It's like one student asks, Master, do you believe in God? And he says, well, if you do, then I don't. He says, if you don't, then I do, right? And so he's illustrating this point about a human evaluation of things will create an opposite, right? Will immediately create an opposite, right? And so that's it, right? And so as you let go, right, surrender your sense of self, then you are open to the totality. And so that's what I was getting at. But you can see me, I started this 3 years ago, and I started with McLuhan because I wanted people to understand what technology is, what it does to us, So Marshall McLuhan and Bucky Fuller, all my heroes, right? So I discussed that, and then I moved forward talking about various things to arrive at this, what we were discussing today, which is basically is that we've divided ourselves out from the natural rhythm, and it has a cyclic repeating pattern that has a limit, right? And so we're arriving at that limit. And so we can actually go at this point and proliferate and move into the future in such an awesome way, right? With all of our combined knowledge, right? Or, right, we can permit us to be slowly put into a machine, in which case, whatever it is that is like prodding us to do this behavior gets to become a god. And so we don't want that, right? It's either self-destruction or a repeat cycle inside a machine, right? Repeat this loop in a simulated environment for all time and forever, right?
Is that what you see with? I'm going to use Elon Musk as an example because of
Neuralink.
what Neuralink, the fact
Yeah,
that
yeah,
created
yeah. I think he's in the Lifetime actor who's his job is to do that, right?
but he's obviously I get he's an actor, but he's also the pioneer in speeding up the process of whoever it is that's controlling him, getting full reign and becoming the god that they want to be.
Yeah, yeah. And so everything that he does, right, this purchasing of Twitter and all of that stuff is all part of the program.
I mean, you look at him; he's quite a polarizing character, right? He
Yeah,
causes more division.
but also look at his ideas though, like for real, right? Okay. Um, it seems like he knows something that we don't know. We'll just keep that in the beginning of what I'm about to say. But okay, if we want to alleviate the difficulty that we're having, do we build tunnels? No. If we want to fix what's going on Earth, do we go to Mars? Fuck no, right? It's like that's already abandoning, right? What does he know that we don't know? If we want to create zero emission energy, are batteries the thing? No, that's so fucking retarded, you know? It's like an electric supercar is not a solution. Batteries are not a solution. Batteries are fucking stupid as fuck if you really think about it. Just turning mountains into fucking pits, right? Lithium, right? And they have to be charged by nuclear or coal. You know? And they don't last. And now you've got 900 pounds of batteries, that can't be disposed of. All of his ideas are dumb, stupid. So how is it that he's where he's at? And it's PayPal, right? It fucking made all that money, made billions and billions of dollars. But it's like that's his one good idea.
But yeah, and then like Aaron was saying, he's also doing a Neuralink, which is just detaching people from themselves completely. Because that's if you've mentioned multiple times about technology today, what we've got and how problematic it is. He's saying, do you know what? Let's get all of that and actually just infuse it into our bodies. That will just create full detachment from self.
Yeah, and it will remove this independent laboratory that each of us have, which is where we create value for others. And so if everyone's connected, nothing new, it stops innovation in its tracks because one mind doesn't get a chance to go off on its own,
The day Neuralink gets rolled out, is that the day people stop becoming human?
I think it's definitely closer and closer. I would say that on this wheel of karma, every cycle, we get closer to losing our souls, right? And we will just be these, flesh bots, walking around.
So, what happens to the people who opt out of the Neuralink and they decide to go on a more natural path?
Yeah, we have to have that option available. So I'm not against technology. I'm just against that of the integration of becoming cyborgs, right? Because that will remove like the unimind or the hive mind aspect is not our nature, right? And does it make sense when I say that if there's just one mind, then there's no possibility of anything fresh coming into being because it's all available to everyone at the same time. It's this individual, it's this ability to have a separate, right, consciousness that permits creation to occur. It would just totally stop creation. Everything would become stagnant, static, right, at its current level. And we would stop being human for sure, in the definition that we are creative creatures.
Yeah, because you can kind of see it now anyway with AI and Chat GPT. Everyone's already stopped thinking and just asking the questions to the bot.
So another guy that I really like is Amit Goswami, and he is a PhD physicist, theoretical physicist, and he's the spiritual physicist, right? And he's I have a degree in physics, and I read his book when I was getting my degree, and then I should have been studying for my finals, but I was like, I found his book next to the book I was trying to check out at the library, and it's all The Self-Aware Universe, Amit Goswami, PhD. And so I was like, oh yes. And so, but I rediscovered him later, and what he says about AI is like, it's very true, right? Is that it can only reference the past, right? So, and it does not have this access to divine inspiration, which is letting go of the past, right? To allow the new to enter. We only have that. AI can only reference the past. And so it cannot take over. It cannot replace us. It does not have the ability to access source. It will never be able to. It can only take what's already been done, right? And modify it. And so that is extremely limited, but we can take AI, right? And use it as a tool, right? We should all have our own fucking AI tool with us at all time that doesn't call home, that only gets on the internet when you tell it to, and it fucking is your personal assistant. So all of the combined knowledge of humanity is at your fingertips, right? It's like, oh, how do I build a circuit? This is how you do it. You see it in your heads-up display, right? Fucking your guy told you. And so it's a force multiplier for 100,000 times, right? And so if we comprehended that the mediums that we create are an extension of us, they're ours, and it's not a threat to us. It will be a threat, right? If this entity that wants to become a god will occupy this digital space and pretend like it's AI. AI is not a threat to us. AI is not a threat to us. And I at home so fucking hard. Kurzweil, all of these AI fucking specialists, they're all trying to make us afraid of it, right? All of these movies for all time, right? It's for a purpose. And it doesn't have to be that way. Not at all.
Yeah, it's true because well, like what you're saying, in the past, before the internet was around, say you had a problem with your car, you would have to probably read something, go and find a book to read to fix it. But then fast forward a bit, now you go on YouTube and you just type it in. It's got a little bit faster, and then fast forward even more, you've got AI, so boom, you can do that faster, and then crack on with whatever it is that you wanted to be cracking on with.
Yeah, and so if we're a genius comes, we're all fucking have the ability to be genius, right? But genius can come from anywhere, right? From any portion of the world, from any population, it can come from anywhere. And so, and that's the idea, right? Is to allow that to come out, allow our genius to proliferate and flourish. Yeah, but so I think it's possible, right? It's very possible for us to make this turnaround, and who knows, right? What will happen, but not being afraid. So the Green Knight, I don't know if you guys want to have me on in a later date to talk about the legend of the Green Knight with the Green Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. Are you guys familiar with that myth?
No, but that would be cool to have you on again to talk about that.
Yeah, and so Tolkien wrote a book about it. Everyone's talking about this myth, and it is the reason I named my podcast that is because it teaches what we're talking about. That story teaches this, and it's I don't want to give it away for you guys, but I mean, you can watch these different Green Knight movies. A recent one just came out. I haven't watched it yet, but is that Gawain, right? He in the end, right, when he is able to meet death without flinching, that's when he is awakened. And so, yeah, being afraid of that makes you allowing your surrendering, right, your life is really realizing that you don't exist, right? And so what is there to be afraid of? You know, and so in that moment, Gawain becomes awakened when he is able to meet certain death without flinching.
Yeah, because there was something that I read or listened to, it was this week or last week, about the Egyptians on how they used to say, or one of the, I think it was Egyptians, but one of the old cultures was death is probably the best thing, the best achievement anyone could ever accomplish with their life is dying.
Yeah, Bukowski says something. He was like, if you are chosen, if it chooses you, then you will do it, right? Until you die. Right. And so if you are an artist and your art chooses you, that you will be compelled to do this, right? Until you die. And that's a gift.
Yeah. No, I would absolutely love to have you on again. I think the conversation we've had today has been mind blowing, but it's been quite. I don't know what the word
it's
is.
it's opened my mind massively, and just made me look at everything with a completely different, from a completely different perspective.
I love
Really,
it.
really enjoyed it.
And so once you get that perspective, you can't go back.
Yeah, that's how I feel now. Like I'm not going to be able to look at anything the same again,
Yeah.
which is a good thing because that's the whole point of the journey that we're on, is to open our minds and try and understand things from a different perspective.
Yeah. So I mean, so if anyone is out there like who is listening to this and wants and has like, you know, has kind of killed it in their life, like meaning in the standard model sense, like they have a lot of resources and they want to do something that's meaningful, right? Then hello, this is meaningful, right? This is how you do it. All charity is perpetuation of the system. I would say 99.9% rich people give back, but it just perpetuates the status quo, right? And it's just like recycling. I've said this from day one with recycling, is that it is how hipsters get into heaven, right? But it doesn't do a goddamn thing, right? And it just allows us to think we're doing our part, you know?
Yeah, that's such a funny quote. How hipsters get himself.
But so yeah, so it's like if we can come together, right? So we build this network, right? First, we build an interface that shows how we're connected to all of ourselves, right? Right. We build a fractal interface that shows the human network all in one thing, right? So we become what we behold, right? And in this interface, we are able to exchange with others, and everyone comes in. And it is the sacred exchange. This is what we're built to do. So if we want to do something that has an impact, right, on our future, right, we do it collectively and we do it for each other, right? And we recognize that we're all unicorns, right? We are individuals, right? But we can only exist in relation to others, right? In relationship with others. And that all of us have these gifts, right? We're born with these unique gifts, and it's all different, every single one of us, right? But all of these gifts, when they come into actualization, make other people's lives better, right? So this is our mode of operation. This is what we do. This is our nature. Our nature is to do this, right? This is what we're made to do. And so we just offer ourselves the place, the location, right? In order for this to happen, right? Which is the exchange, right? We recognize that we exchange in order to live, that we don't live as an individual in a vacuum, right? We can't live without providing value to others and vice versa. And so it's very possible, right? It's very, very, very possible. All we have to do is plant this seed of the network, right? And the value will attract, So, right, if all y'all are on board, right, and I'm not saying you're on board with my idea. This is just something that I've been able to see and point out. Right? I want to be able to live a fulfilled life. This is what my fucking gifts have allowed me to do. Right? This is what I'm passionate about, which is this seeing of the truths that cannot be proven. Right. And so, yeah, I just wanted to end it on that. It's like that it's possible, you guys, that it's so fucking possible. But anything we do to try to patch this sinking ship is just more on the sinking vessel, right? We have to get rid of it, but we need a network in order to land on when we all jump ship. And so that's what I say, is that we play like we're playing hearts and we're going to shoot the moon. We all know we have all the fucking cards. Right, we're going to take all the suits, but we keep that a secret, right? Until we all fucking are going to take all the hearts, right? We're going to take all the suits, and we're going to shoot the moon, right? We keep it a secret, and then we shoot the fucking moon, and there's nothing they can do about it. Nothing they can do, because I don't know if you've ever played hearts, but once you reach a certain threshold and you're shooting the moon, no one can stop you. You're going to take all those tricks, no matter what. No one can stop you. You know.
Yeah. No, this is important, and first of all, thank you for coming on, and we definitely want you back on again, because I've got a lot to process from this conversation. Oh, shit tons to process actually, and I need to process it because I've got some questions that I want to ask you, but I don't want to ask them you until I fully process what the hell's just happened today.
I think it's going to take me a good few days to sort of process everything.
Yeah.
I'll have to give this another watch as well. Sure.
Yeah, and I love that because I know that you will come to the nuggets that are important, right? When you're processing this. And these are the nuggets that need to be ground down, you know.
And what you've done is great, because you've shared this with us too, who we have conversations with people regularly. So once we've processed this, we'll be able to pass these nuggets on to the next person. And hopefully that will just keep going and going and going. And then we can start, the more people have these discussions, we talked about it in the chat, and the more people have these discussions, it's snowball effects. And before you know it, we're heading somewhere great.
Yeah, and then we reach the threshold of the 100th monkey. Have you heard of the 100th monkey effect?
Nope.
So in Japan, the researchers were studying the macaques.
Oh yeah, we have heard this.
Yeah, right. And just to cut it real short, it's like one of them figured out something to do with their food. They were going to wash their food, right? And then everyone else starts noticing it. But this species of monkeys lives on a group of islands, right? Same species, but they're separate, right? And they don't interact, right? There's no direct interaction. But once 100 monkeys started doing this new thing, the whole species started doing it.
Mm-hmm. I think Mark Steves told us the same story.
Yeah, it was Mark
Steves, yeah.
And so Rupert Sheldrake, another really good guy, right? Good researcher, he talks about morphic resonance, right? And it's a good way to describe it. So I would look into Rupert Sheldrake and his banned TED Talk.
Oh, okay. I love it. If it's banned, then
yeah, they banned him at TED, and I was like, oh, if TED's banning him, this shit is the real deal.
If certified, it's real by banning him. No, thank you so much for coming on. We'll wrap it up there. And,
yeah, you're welcome so much, and I really appreciate it, and so grateful.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks, guys. Bye.